Well, in 1939, the Minister of Justice had the right to arrest, they had the right to seize property, they had the right to seize any kind of activities of Canadians who were born in countries that were at war with Canada.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have heard of the Japanese internment camps, but I, like many people, had not heard of this. So,
right.
So let's look at the numbers. 600 people, Italian-Canadian men, and 4 women were sent to internment camps across Canada. 215 or so were here in Montreal, and that's where your grandfather was.
That's right.
Okay, so what happened to your grandfather?
Well, what happened to my grandfather was what happened to all the other Italian-Canadians across Canada was basically they were put on lists. And what happened was in the late 1930s, the RCMP was given instructions to create lists of people that could be potential saboteurs toward Canada, and in case a war broke out. Now the problem was there were, in Montreal for example, there were 3 people that were list makers, and they were paid per head. So you had
They were paid per head?
Yes.
So what's going to happen?
Exactly.
Right.
So what happened, I'll give you one example. There were the 3 Monaco brothers, and they belonged to a church near Papineau, and there were 2 ministers that they had to vote for which one they wanted in. So it was done by a show of hands. What they didn't know is that one of the ministers of that church was one of the paid informants. So naturally, the paid informant, he looked over the room. All the men that had put up their hand ended up on the list, and they were interned.
So let's talk about what that does to a family and to a community. You know, we've heard a lot from the Japanese families who went through the internment camps. You know, you were just saying to me during the break, Joyce, that these were people who felt Canadian. Yes, they were born elsewhere, yeah. But you know, my parents were immigrants and they felt very Canadian as well. So yeah. What does that do to a community? And what does, you know, you referred to the men that came back as broken men, right? They came back quiet, they didn't want to talk about it. But what does that do to a family?
Well, it uproots you because, for example, you had a man like Alfredo Sebastiani who came here. He even fought. He volunteered to fight in World War I as a Canadian. And he had a large luxury shoe company called La Gioconda. There were 4 factories, employed over 2,000 people, brought in his nephews to work in the plant. One was chief financial officer, the other was the shoe designer. And when the war broke out, the factories were seized by the Canadian government. The nephews were interned. He was under house arrest because of his illness. And when they came out, the factories,
everything was gone.
Everything was gone, and they couldn't even find jobs.
So we were also talking about why, you know, you reached out to us with this story because, you know, we were saying in this particular context, right, of Bill 21 and this creation of an us versus them mentality, do you see any lines that can be drawn with what's happening today and what happened all those years ago?
Absolutely, because what you're doing is you're creating the other. And once you're creating a targeted group. When the men were interned, it was this fear of others. And so this was a way for the Canadian government to show Canadians, don't worry, we're taking care of you. Like one of the internees said, it was all show business. And
it doesn't matter what happens to them as long as everybody else feels safe. We're running out of time, and I do want to talk about this. So you sent over in your notes, you said that if there is any kind of reparation, any kind of sort of, because, you know, there was an apology, the government apologized, but if there's any remuneration, you said that you would give it to Heritage Canada for all Canadians. And what did you say to me? You just said, because we wanted to show that.
Yeah, because when I spoke to the children of the internees, what they want to do is that if there is any kind of money coming from the government, that we would like to give it to Heritage Canada, and it's a way of showing to Canadians that we were always loyal to Canada, and we also want all Canadians to benefit and to learn from this experience.
But Joyce, I just said to you, it's 2019, and you still feel like you have to prove that you're loyal to Canada.
It's the families, it's the children of the families want to show that because they were never disloyal to Canada. And so this is their way to show it. And I think
in 2019 and you're still trying to prove it. Which means that those stars, which means that it runs deep, right?
I guess, yeah, it really proves that. It really speaks to that, absolutely. And this is what the children wanted, because they want to walk out of this with their heads held high, and we want to give it back to a Canadian institution. And it makes them, you know what it is? It's that in 1940 their voice was taken away. They were not allowed to speak. They had no power, no agency, nothing. And today, this government listened to them, because the apology addressed the families. It was all about listening to what the families said. And this is where the moral justice comes in, because they were listened to by the government. They were spoken to directly by Prime Minister Trudeau. And now that they've been spoken to, now allow them to have their voice. Don't take it away from them. This is what they want. Let's listen.
Joyce Pillarella, thank you so much for enlightening us on this dark moment in our history.
Thank you
but
so
it's
much,
nice to
Joanne.
see that it's moving forward. Thank you so much for joining us
Thanks,
again.
Joanne.
All right.
Thank you, member. The member for Kootenay West.
On January 10th, the Trail and District Library opened the exhibit Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Times, Italian-Canadian Internment Experience. This project commemorates the experience of Italian Canadians during World War II. On June 10th, 1940, Mussolini joined the war. Within minutes of this announcement, the Canadian government gave the RCMP orders to arrest Italian Canadians considered a threat to the nation's security. 31,000 were officially designated as enemy aliens. Of these, about 600 were taken from their homes and separated from their families. Viewed as fascist supporters and even spies, they were held in prisons and remote camps. None of them were ever formally charged in a court of law. They all felt the repercussions. In many cases, these events contributed to fear and hostilities in their communities across Canada, leading to loss of work, vandalism, verbal abuse, and violence. In Trail, 7 men were arrested that June. Eugenio Dell'Alana, Armando Cecchini, Pampolino DeVito, and August Secco were all released 1 month later. Silvio Romano was not released till July 42. Victor Fabri, a lawyer whose wife and family lived in Vancouver, wasn't released until December 41. Fioravanti Tanishi, or Fred, was detained until September 43. After his release, Fred returned to Trail and in June 45 married a Canadian-born Italian, Emily, 15 years his junior, and they had 10 kids. His son Ray, who still lives in Trail, said they fell in love in Vancouver before the war. Her mother said no. Fred was too old, the marriage couldn't happen. Fred sent Emily letters during his detainment via the priest, as he knew her mother would never let her have the letters. The mother, though, was too smart and told the priest if he got letters to hide them. It obviously didn't work. Trail is the only community outside Toronto where the exhibit is being displayed. Although you can also go online to Italian-Canadian www.ca and view stories, photos, and listen to interviews of Italian Canadians talking about how the internment affected their families. Men from Kamloops, Vancouver, and Trail, a dark part of our history that is finally being shared.
Thank you, member.